She ran, breath ragged, heart pounding, the sound of death closing in like a ticking clock. The masked figure never rushed, each step deliberate, inevitable. Just as the blade gleamed above her, ready to fall, a sudden flash cut through the dark. A tall man appeared from nowhere, muscles tense, eyes glowing with quiet fury. His cloak billowed in the cold mist as he caught the scythe midair. No one knew who he was. Behind him, the girl gasped, still reeling from her escape. In front of him, Death narrowed his eyes, realizing this game was far from over, and his opponent was no ordinary man. My name is Alara. I was 23 when it happened. I just started my graduate program in folklore at a small university in Oregon. Most of my days were quiet, books, lectures, rainy walks between old buildings. I liked that routine. I liked knowing what to expect. Then came the research project. Professor Camden offered me access to the university's oldest archive, sealed off since the 60s. He called it a test of curiosity, and I guess I passed it. The archive was buried in the sub-basement beneath the old humanities hall. No one had been there in decades. The floorboards above groaned every time I passed through. The key he gave me was rusted, and I had to jiggle it 3 times to get the lock to turn. Inside, it smelled like dust and something sweeter, like dried herbs. The light flickered when I stepped in, and I didn't trust it, so I brought a lantern. Shelves lined the walls, handwritten journals, photos, broken artifacts sealed in glass boxes. I logged everything I touched, kept careful notes, always closed the door behind me. But on the 7th visit, the door wouldn't close. No matter how hard I pulled, it just hung there half open, like the room didn't want to be alone anymore. That's when I noticed the back wall. A faded tapestry, draped over bricks. I hadn't seen it before. It was stitched with symbols I didn't recognize in deep red thread. Behind it, there was a narrow opening. I thought maybe it led to old storage. I know how stupid it sounds now, but I stepped inside. It was colder than I expected, and deeper. My lantern barely lit the way. After about 10 feet, the floor dipped, sloping like a tunnel into the earth. I should have stopped, but something in me pushed forward, like I was walking into a memory. The air turned damp, the walls narrowed. I started to hear something, a soft scraping. It echoed like footsteps, but never matched mine. Then my lantern went out, just like that. No wind, no sound, just darkness. I stood still, breathing slow, my hands out in front of me. When I turned back, the path was gone. I swear it. There was only stone behind me. Solid, cold stone. I touched every inch, panic crawling up my spine. I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes? Hours? Then I saw her. A woman, glowing faintly in the dark, her dress torn like she'd been running. She didn't speak, just looked at me with wide, glassy eyes, and behind her the air shimmered, like heat or water. I didn't understand what I was seeing until she reached for me. Her fingers brushed mine, and the cold vanished. Everything around me shifted. Sounds returned, heavy and old, and when I opened my eyes again, the tunnel was gone. I stood in a stone room. But it wasn't the archive. There were torches on the walls, dust on my shoes, and voices, real ones outside the door. I don't know how long I stood there after the tunnel vanished. Maybe seconds, maybe more. My hands were still shaking, and I had that numb pressure in my ears like I'd just surfaced from underwater. The stone walls around me were dry, cold, not like the damp corridor I had walked through. The torches weren't flickering like they should have. They held still, like time was pressing too tightly around them. There was no sign of the tapestry or the hallway behind it. Only a narrow stone room with one door that looked older than anything I'd seen before. I didn't want to touch it. My fingers hovered just above the surface. The wood was smooth, like it had been touched 1,000 times, but never changed. I pressed lightly, and the door creaked open without force. It wasn't locked. That felt more unsettling than if it had been. The hallway outside was lined with stone arches, ivy curling through cracks in the wall. I could hear faint voices, not modern ones. There was a rhythm to them, something rehearsed like chanting or prayer. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. A shadow moved across the far end of the corridor. I pressed myself back into the wall, holding my breath. The shape stopped, turned. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of a figure, long robes, slow, deliberate steps. My heart started thudding again. I looked for a place to hide but found none. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, ready to run, but stopped when I saw a young man standing there. He looked just as startled as I was. His jacket was torn at the sleeve, and his face had a smear of dirt across the cheek. But his eyes were sharp. Awake, he whispered quickly. Told me I didn't belong here, that he didn't either. His name was Callum. He said we weren't the first, that others had been pulled in and never found their way back. He motioned for me to follow him before the chanting returned. I didn't ask questions. I followed him through a narrow passage behind a crumbling column, and we ducked into what looked like an old scriptorium. Books lined the walls, but none had titles I recognized. The language looked almost Latin, but not quite. Callum watched the door as I caught my breath. He had been here 3 days, or what felt like it. He said time didn't flow right. Sometimes the same hour repeated. Sometimes a whole day vanished like it had never happened. He wasn't the only one here. There was a woman too, someone he had met earlier. Her name was Elise. She had found a journal that talked about doorways hidden across time, guarded by keepers in robes. People who used to be travelers like us, but lost too long, forgot who they were. That was who we had seen in the hallway. Callum said Elise had gone searching for the next doorway but hadn't returned. He wanted to find her, but the paths changed. The halls moved. It was like the place was breathing, shifting behind your back when you weren't looking. I felt dizzy just listening, but the strangest part was how calm he sounded, like fear had burned out and all that was left was purpose. He handed me a thin silver coin he said he found under a stair. On one side was an engraving of a tree, on the other a cracked circle. "Keep it close," he said. "It helps you remember what's real." I wanted to ask how he knew that, but then the door creaked. We froze. A soft scraping sound moved down the hallway. Not footsteps exactly. More like something being dragged. Callum held a finger to his lips and backed us into a small alcove behind a curtain. We didn't speak, didn't move. Through the gap in the fabric, I saw the figure from before pass by. Their head turned slightly as if listening, but they never stopped. Just continued down the corridor and out of sight. When the sound faded, Callum let out a breath and stepped out. He said we couldn't stay long. The walls had memory. If we stayed too long in one place, we'd leave a trace. And they could follow that. I wasn't sure what he meant, but I believed him. We slipped into another corridor, and that's when I saw something strange. A mirror. Cracked down the center, but it wasn't reflecting us. It showed a room I recognized. The archive room. My backpack still sitting on the desk. Callum pulled me back, said not yet. He said some mirrors were traps. Not all of them led home. Some led deeper. Others were watchers. I asked how he knew the difference. He didn't answer. He just stared into the glass like he remembered something he'd tried to forget. I kept thinking about the mirror. It was still in my mind hours later, even as we moved deeper through the underground halls. It wasn't just the reflection or what it showed. It was the way it seemed to breathe, the way the crack curved like it had grown that way over time. I didn't want to admit it, but something about it felt like it knew I was there. Callum stayed quiet most of the time. He was careful with each turn, stopping often to listen, to test the ground. Sometimes he would whisper a word I didn't understand and wait like someone might answer. I didn't ask where he learned that. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Eventually, we reached what looked like a library, but nothing about it felt safe. The shelves were built directly into the stone. The books were bound in cloth, stitched with thread too fine for any time I recognized. A fire burned in the center without smoke, casting a soft green hue. Elise sat nearby, her eyes closed, her hands pressed flat against an open page. When she looked up, I expected relief, but all I saw was exhaustion. She didn't say much, only that the library had shifted again and she had nearly been locked in one of the echo chambers. I didn't know what that meant, but Callum clearly did. His face dropped slightly. I felt like I was always 2 steps behind them, and the ground kept changing with each one. There was another person in the room too. A woman named Alina. She hadn't spoken yet, but she watched everything. Her dark hair was braided back tightly, and she wore a long scarf wrapped several times around her neck. Her eyes scanned the walls like they were waiting to collapse. Elise handed me a map. It wasn't paper, more like pressed silk with gold threads. She traced a line through a corridor marked with symbols. She said if we reached the Chamber of Keys, we might find the origin point. a place that anchored all the doorways across time. If we could get there, maybe we'd understand how to reverse it. But there was a risk. The further we traveled, the more of ourselves we left behind. She said it like it was a fact, not a theory. People forget. First little things, then faces, then names. That's why they marked their arms with ink, a memory chain. Something to remind them who they were. I hadn't done that yet. I wasn't ready to admit this might last longer than a night. We moved quickly. Callum led, Elise watched behind, and I stayed in the middle. Alina moved on the edges, quiet, always near a wall. The hallway narrowed after a while, the stone beginning to show carvings I hadn't seen before. Curved lines, repeating shapes, almost like music written without notes. Then the air shifted, thicker, heavier, and a low hum began, not from around us but beneath us. I felt it in my ribs before I heard it in my ears. We stopped. There was a door ahead, but it wasn't like the others. It wasn't open, it pulsed, a soft red light behind the wood, like a heartbeat. Callum hesitated. Elise placed a hand on his shoulder. They didn't speak, but he stepped back. She turned to me, pointed at the thread around my wrist. I had forgotten I was still wearing it, the one from earlier that I thought was a bracelet. She said that was my tether. I'd understand soon. Alina opened the door. Inside was a room with no corners. Every wall curved inward, and in the center was a pedestal holding something that didn't look physical. A shimmer, like heat rising off asphalt. But it was still, silent. The hum grew louder as we entered. It wasn't painful, but it pressed against every thought I had. Elise stepped forward, held out her hand. Her fingertips stopped just short of the shimmer. Then she pulled away. She looked at Callum, then at me. "It's yours." I didn't know what she meant. I stepped closer. As I reached out, something flickered inside the shimmer. A figure. Brief. Gone. My chest tightened. My wrist burned. The thread was glowing. Callum said my arrival wasn't random. That shimmer was my doorway. But I didn't want to walk through it. Not yet. I didn't want to go alone. The room darkened, the shimmer faded slightly, and that's when we heard the voice. It didn't sound near, it sounded inside. One word, over and over. Return, return. I didn't sleep. None of us did. The room where the shimmer pulsed never fully went dark, and the whispers continued long after we left. Elise said it would fade, that it was part of the adjustment, but it didn't feel like something fading. It felt like something pulling. Callum traced new paths on the map. The silk had shifted, lines moved, symbols rearranged themselves, as if the whole thing was alive and reacting to our presence. Alina kept her back to the walls. She didn't trust the layout anymore. I couldn't blame her. My steps no longer echoed the same way twice. We walked through a corridor lined with glass, not mirrors, not windows, just walls that showed different things. One pane showed the stars moving too fast, another showed an empty room I was sure I'd seen before. Then I saw myself, not as I was now. I was younger, in my childhood bedroom, watching me sleep. I blinked, and it was gone. We weren't alone in this section. 2 more travelers crossed our path. One of them, a tall man named Dorian, carried a sphere that hovered just above his palm. He said it was a memory keeper. The woman with him, Morel, was quiet but alert. Her hair braided in loops, her eyes never resting on any one thing for long. They had lost their group days ago and were looking for the north gate. Callum didn't trust them, but Elise invited them to rest. We stayed close, but separate. Around the corner, we found another door like the last. No hinges, no frame, just a curve of light in the wall. I touched it. Warm, but not hot. It throbbed with a faint pulse, slower than before. The return whispers had stopped. Something else waited beyond this one. Dorian offered his sphere. He said it could scan the doorway, warn us if it led into a loop. Elise agreed. The sphere pulsed once, twice, then dimmed. It was safe. For now. Alina still looked unconvinced, but she said nothing. We stepped through, one by one. The air was heavier here, thicker with scent. Stone, dust, something sweet but rotting at the edges. The walls were round, no corners. The floor dipped gently downward, spiraling toward a center point none of us could see yet. Our footsteps sounded different again, as if the space didn't want us to be heard clearly. There were symbols on the ground, at first just patterns, but after a few steps they formed something closer to writing. Elise stopped. She could read it. She said it was a warning. A loop was broken here. Time had cracked once before. What we saw might not be true. Dorian stayed near the walls, letting the sphere hover forward. Morel walked beside me. She asked about my tether. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure what it meant anymore. Every hour here shifted my sense of before and after. The chamber opened suddenly, a wide circle lit from above by no source we could see. At the center was a raised platform with an object floating just above it. Not the shimmer from before. This was darker, denser, like something that remembered being solid but had forgotten how. We stepped closer. Elise gasped softly. The air buzzed. My thread glowed again, faint but steady. Morel reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed it, everything stopped. No sound, no breath. Then a rush of images hit my mind. Places I'd never been, faces I didn't know, running, falling, standing at the edge of a lake that shimmered like the sky was upside down. When it ended, Morel was on the floor, her hand over her heart. The thread was still glowing. Dorian helped her up. His face had gone pale. He asked what she saw, but she didn't answer, just looked at me and shook her head. Callum said we had to leave. Now, Elise disagreed. She believed this place held the anchor, the thing connecting all versions of the shimmer. If we left now, it might vanish again. That's when the light changed. From above, a shadow moved across the platform. We all turned, but no one was there. Just the sensation of something enormous looking back. Not with eyes, with memory. Then the voices returned. Not returned this time. Something new. Stay, stay, stay. I used to think fear was something loud, something that screamed through your mind and made your legs freeze. But this place taught me fear was silent. It wrapped around your thoughts like steam around glass, quiet and persistent, leaving you unsure what was real. That moment, when the air stopped and the shadows seemed to breathe, I knew we were somewhere we were not meant to be. Morel hadn't spoken since the thread connected her. She walked with us, but her eyes lingered in corners, like she was seeing something we couldn't. Dorian hovered close, too close sometimes, like he was afraid she'd vanish if he looked away. Elise said we should rest before entering the next chamber, but Callum didn't trust the ground anymore. Neither did I. Every step forward echoed slightly off-key, like sound bending around something invisible. We followed a new corridor that twisted like a shell. The ceiling curved too low in places. My shoulder brushed against something, soft and warm, but when I turned, there was only wall. Alina touched a mark along the edge and pulled her hand back like it burned her. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her face said enough. The symbols were changing again. Faster now, as if trying to catch up with us or warn us away. The corridor opened into a long gallery filled with paintings. Not flat ones. They pulsed, breathed, living memories captured in time. One showed a field under a violet sky. Another showed a door hovering in the middle of the ocean. And one showed us, standing exactly as we were. Same positions, same shadows, except in the painting something stood behind me. A shape tall and thin, hands just inches from my shoulders. Elise noticed it too. She grabbed my arm, pulled me back, but nothing followed. The image changed when we turned around. It became a blur of movement, too fast to follow. I was tired of things we couldn't explain, tired of trusting walls that whispered when we looked away. We kept moving, down a stairwell that spiraled with no railings, just light bouncing off a strange mist below. At the bottom, the air changed again, cooler and quieter. There was a platform in the center with 5 stone columns that hummed when we got close. Dorian pressed his sphere into the space between 2 columns. It lit up, but instead of scanning, it fractured. Not violently, just silently breaking into 6 glowing fragments that hovered, then sank into the floor. That's when we heard footsteps, not ours. From the other side of the room, a figure walked out of the dark. She was older, maybe 50, wrapped in layers of soft green fabric. Her name was Amira. She said she had been here a long time. Her eyes were sharp but not cruel. She didn't ask who we were. She already knew. She spoke to Morel first, and something passed between them. Recognition maybe, or warning. Then she turned to me and said the tether I carried had passed through this chamber before. I asked when. She said that question didn't apply here. I didn't like how easily she said it, like she had let go of the idea of time altogether. Callum asked what this place was. She called it a fracture garden, not made but grown, a place where broken timelines came to rest, tangled in themselves until someone pulled them apart. She told us if we stayed too long, we'd forget the way back. Our memories would fray at the edges, just enough to make the exits disappear. Dorian didn't believe her. He walked toward the far column, trying to trace the symbols with a shard from his broken sphere. The moment he touched it, the room shifted. The walls didn't move, but the space inside did. Suddenly, we were standing in a mirrored version of the room. Our reflections were gone. Amira was gone. The platform was empty. Morel said my name, only it wasn't her voice, it was mine. I turned and saw her standing still, eyes wide, lips unmoving. The voice echoed again, this time from behind me. Same words, same tone. It was like the chamber had learned my voice, learned all of us. We stood frozen until Elise reached out and touched the platform. Light poured out in soft spirals. The reflection room faded. We were back. Amira was still there, sitting now as if she'd never moved. She looked tired. She said this place had rules, not like ours, not written, lived, felt. We had to decide soon, go deeper or go back. But going back meant forgetting. She looked at me when she said that. Like she knew I was the one who had already started forgetting small things. A face here, a detail there, something slipping. I still don't know what I chose, only that the next time I looked around, the platform was behind us. The corridor ahead shimmered. We walked, and I didn't ask where it led. I thought that leaving the chamber would bring some kind of relief, like crossing a finish line or stepping out of a bad dream. But nothing felt lighter. My chest was still tight. My thoughts still moved too slow, like they were being filtered through fog. The others didn't say much either, as if all of us were quietly trying to hold on to what we still understood. The hallway ahead had no doors, no markings, just walls that pulsed slightly when you walked too close, like they were breathing in sync with us. I noticed Joran glancing back more often. He said he felt like we were being followed, but the footsteps weren't there. It wasn't sound, it was weight. The kind of pressure you feel when someone's looking at you without blinking. Talia stayed closer to me this time. Her hand brushed mine when the walls flickered, and we both looked away quickly. Not out of awkwardness, but because neither of us wanted to admit we were scared. We'd been through enough strange things by now that fear should have dulled, but somehow it had sharpened instead. It knew our names now. It knew which one of us would break first. We stopped when we found the circle. Not drawn or carved. It was light itself, suspended above the floor, slowly spinning like a wheel of smoke. In the center, there was a mirror. But it didn't show us. It showed a place I'd never seen. A room with red velvet chairs and sunlight through tall windows. Music was playing, faint, like a music box hidden behind layers of glass. And then a man appeared, just sitting, smiling gently, as if he'd been waiting for someone to look in. Alaric called him the gatekeeper, said he'd read something in one of the earlier symbols that described him. Not a guardian, but a witness. Someone who recorded the crossing of timelines. Someone who remembered the ones the world forgot. He wasn't threatening, but he wasn't comforting either. He just watched. Even when I stepped forward and asked if he could hear us, he nodded once. That was all. Then the mirror cracked, not shattered, just a thin line across the center, like a heartbeat skipping once. The image warped and showed something else. It was us again, but we were older, worn, some missing. Talia's reflection had a scar along her jaw. Joran walked with a limp. I wasn't there at all. I didn't know what that meant. Or maybe I did. I just didn't want to admit it. Behind us, the wall slid open without sound. Another passage, narrower. The air tasted like paper and metal. A scent I remembered from somewhere. Maybe an old library, maybe a dream. It was hard to say anymore. Every memory felt one layer removed, like I was flipping through someone else's photo album. This time, it was Anna who led. She said she recognized the corridor, that she'd seen it before, in a place that didn't exist. We didn't ask her to explain. None of us had answers, just instincts, and lately hers had been right. We followed her in silence, listening to the sound of our own breathing and the soft humming of the lights above us, which flickered like they were trying to communicate. At the end of the passage, there was a door. Old wood, chipped edges, and a brass handle that looked too modern to belong here. I touched it first, expecting cold, but it was warm, like something had just used it. I looked at Joran, who gave a slight nod, and then we pushed it open together. Inside was a kitchen, bright, clean, as if someone had just stepped out to grab something. There were dishes in the sink, a kettle still steaming on the stove, and chairs pulled away from the table like a family had been sitting there just minutes before. It was jarring, too normal, too wrong, because outside this room the world made no sense, but in here, time was intact. I checked the calendar on the fridge. It said 1973. Talia picked up a photo from the counter. It showed a woman and two boys standing on a porch. The woman had Anna's eyes. Same shape, same quiet defiance. Anna didn't speak. She just stared, frozen, like time had wrapped around her and refused to let go. I wanted to touch her shoulder, but didn't. Whatever she was remembering, it wasn't meant to be shared yet.